How about if you put it like this? Will it work?
Be able to set a takeoff for coach.
Doesn't matter. This should work. That's fine. I think we can just leave it like that. Yeah? Hoja? Bismillah. All right, thank you. All right, I'd like to go ahead and get started with your permission. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can you all hear me well, especially those in the back? Yes? Yes. Good. Lovely. So I'd like to take seriously one of the methodological questions that we were presented with, namely, to take seriously the role of the state in the understandings of Sufism. Somewhat mischievously, I'm going to explore whether it is possible to read three different understandings of a person who is known and much beloved to many of us in this room in three different nation-state contexts. Hazrat Mevlana in the modern secular Turkish Republic, Hazrat Mawlana in a Shia Iran, and that transcendent, timeless, universal mystic liberated from the prison of Islam known as Rumi, who is unencumbered by the boundaries of religion. And I want us to take seriously the possibility that these nation-state enforcement of particular parameters have so changed the way that each of these understandings comes about so as to be almost mutually unintelligible. Being a guest of Hazrat Kenan Rifai and indebted to our Turkish friends, and in particular Jamal Nur Hoja, who is the embodiment of the teachings of Kenan Rifai, we're going to begin with our Turkish friends. It is, of course, the Ottoman Empire, and later on Turkey, which has the great honor of hosting Hazrat Mevlana eternally. It is the city of Konya, which is blessed with the body of Mevlana, and it is this shrine, Torbe, which has attracted lovers and pilgrims for centuries after centuries. The numbers are that every year over 1 million visitors come from all over the world, Muslims and non-Muslims. And they've been coming since the year after the burial of Hazrat Mevlana there in 1273, when this shrine was constructed. Now we know that during the Ottoman era, the legacy of Hazrat Mevlana was enshrined, and that there were Mevlevi tariqat, which spread everywhere that the Ottoman Empire went. So whether we are talking about today's Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, even Egypt, Iraq, or Southeast Europe, the institutional and ritual legacy of Hazrat Mevlana seems to be mapped onto the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. For as much as Mevlana has a presence in the Iranian and South Asian contexts, we don't find the Mevlevi order spreading to those contexts. Furthermore, we know that it's in the Ottoman context, as far back as Damad Ibrahim Pasha, that the Mesnevi becomes incorporated into the curriculum of the madrasa. Right? This is an important development. And we even have an institution, the Mesnevi Khane, academies which are established for the proper recitation and commentary on the Masnavi itself. I don't know, other than the Quran, of any other text in Islamic history which has had an entire academy devoted to the particular study of it. And these Mesnevi Khanes spread throughout the former Ottoman Empire. Even when one goes for ziyarat, for pilgrimage inside the shrine, as you enter into the very presence of Hazrat Pir, you are reminded of Ottoman patronage when you notice the silver gates, which of course are endowed by Suleiman Kanuni. What is particularly intriguing is that the rituals of the Mevlevi order, which of course begin with the sound of the ney and incorporate Mevlana's poetry, demonstrate a way in which Mevlana functions in the Ottoman and even post-Ottoman context as a full-fledged Sufi saint. He is the founder of a Sufi order. There's community, there's ritual, there's the devran, there's the whirling, there is recitation of Quran and poetry. And all of this, of course, leads us to the very famous ritualistic embodied forms of spiritual practice under the Mevlevis. Even when we go over to the realm of the arts, it's under Ottoman patronage that this expands to other notions. So if you are a lover of the Prophet and you were worried that perhaps Hazrat Peygambar would have been deprived of the opportunity to read the Masnavi, the Ottomans solved that problem for you. So certain Ottoman miniatures, such as the one here by Hussam Chelebi, depict the Prophet in paradise reciting the Masnavi to the followers and the companions of the Prophet. This again is part of the artistic tradition of the Mevlevi order in an Ottoman context. We also have other examples of what you could call Sufi paraphernalia, prayer books which the worshippers are going to recite. In all of these contexts, Mevlana functions as a Sufi master in charge of identifying the vision and the practice of a Sufi order. So here we have Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam, prayer that is recited by the Mevlevis. All of this, of course, begins to undergo an important shift with the coming of the transition from Ottoman Empire to the secular Turkish Republic. And we get the uneasy transition from what has been a shrine into a museum. Whereas once people went for pilgrimage, and they still come for pilgrimage, now you have to buy tickets. And there is a move towards museumification of the turbe, so that many people walk around taking selfies and having headphones on, where you go from station to station as one would in the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Sackler or the Smithsonian, what have you. We know that the transition taking place under Ataturk is complicated. Far from some of the common associations and stereotypes of a model of laïcité, which is based on the complete banishing of religion from the public arena, we actually see the role of the state to be the controlling of religion in the public square. So the famous quote from Ataturk, Mevlana is a great reformer who welded Islam to the Turkish soul. This is what he writes in the guidebook of the Hazrat Mevlana Turbe upon visiting it in 1924. Right before he passes the law in 1925, abolishing the formal practice of Sufi orders. So the Sufi titles, Sufi robes, and Sufi practices are all outlawed. So within the Turkish Republic, all the Sufi tariqats go underground, and many of them re-emerge as an NGO. This one is the Society for Preservation of Turkish Music. That one is the Society for Preservation of Turkish Literature. And I'm told that one of them is even the Turkish Women's Cultural Association. But here's the interesting thing about museumification, is that ritual and pilgrimage are stubborn. They're sticky, to use a favorite term of mine. So here we are in the room that under the time of the early Mevlevis was the prayer room. When it's turned into a museum, they put on these glass-covered displays with copies of the Quran and poetry to break up a prayer room so that you walk around it not lined up towards the Qibla, but to watch these historical artifacts. Sufism becomes a relic of the past rather than something that you participate in as a pilgrim. And even then, in the middle of the room, there is one strand of the beard of Hazrat Paygambar. And what is that father, accompanied by his children, doing? Hand raised up in prayer in the vicinity of something that reminds them of the Prophet. Right? Museumification is never complete. And in the current Turkish Republic, under the transformations that have arisen under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, there is a rolling back of the secularization and a greater willingness to introduce a certain understanding of Islam back into the public arena. So the same room, which was the prayer house, and it became the display house for Quran and poetry, is now yet again converted into a prayer room. Right? So you see the shifting boundaries of the same shrine, museum, shrine-ish space under the changing confines of a modern nation state. And even the ones who are not so fond of some of these recent changes. I happened to be in Gezi Park around the time of the turbulent protests there, and some of the folks who very much objected to the particular policies of President Erdogan were voicing their political dissent through wearing the outfit of the whirling dervishes, accompanied by gas masks, to protest the use of tear gas. Let's move from there to the Iranian example. Iranians who refer to him as Mawlana Jalaluddin Balkhi or Mawlavi, never as Rumi. Rumi means the Roman. Why on God's earth would Persians be referring to him as the Roman, right? And here's the complicating factor that we deal with. Of course, in Persian language, Persian literature, so much of which is indebted to mystical literature, there's this exquisite love affair with the mystical poetry of Mawlana, Hafiz, Attar, Sa'di, Nizami, and others. All of them, of course, are Sunni figures. All of them come from a Sunni background. Iran is going to undergo an important and turbulent and at times violent transition to a Shi'i state. And so the change that we see is that within a Shi'i Iran, over the course of the last 500 years, there's going to be a focus on Mawlana not as a Sufi saint per se, but rather as a mystical poet. The conversation is going to be to put him in the pantheon of the great poets, separated from ritual, communal, and institutional priorities. So here's a beautiful example of a Safavid era Quran, Quran, yes, Quran in Persian, meaning Masnavi miniature. So let's remember that it's in the year 1501 that Shah Ismail officially imposes Shi'ism as the state religion. There are Sufi shrines, such as the shrine of Jami and Abdul Qadir Gilani, that are destroyed. Many Sufis are killed as part of this process. What is more subtle and more interesting in some ways from our point of view is this. Whatever we think of as Sufi thought and practice, before the Orientalists got a hold of it, within a Safavid context of Iran, it splits into two understandings. Something that could be called Irfan al-Nazari, theoretical gnosis, a highly metaphysical notion of mysticism, as distinct from Irfan Amali, a practical, ritual-based model of mystical practice. Irfan al-Nazari, this metaphysical model of mysticism, is continued and is wed to a very Shi'i understanding of theosophy. Sufi orders, as such, are heavily marginalized compared to what they had been before in an Iranian context. Iranian spirituality moves in a very Ali-loving direction, such as miniatures like this that we see of Imam Ali sitting on the shoulders of Hazrat Payghambar, and even the Shahadatain statement, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, it has a third component added to it, Ali Waliullah, right? Prophethood is not complete until you add the vilayat of Imam Ali to it. So what happens is, in a contemporary Iranian setting, when you go and you buy a poetry book of the Divan-e-Shams, there are poems added to the classical canon of Hazrat Mawlana. Poems which are not found in any classical manuscript, but they're now printed alongside all the other ghazals that you have. So for example, there's about a 5-page poem that ends with the wonderful refrain, Ali Bood. It's Ali. An shah ke ba danish u din bood, Ali bood. Masjood malak, sajid ma'bood, Ali bood. That king who was with knowledge and the faith, it's Ali. The one that all the angels bowed down to, that was Ali. Ham awwal u ham akhar, ham zahir u batin. The Alpha and the Omega, the manifest and the inward, it's Ali. آن شاه سرافراز کن در شب معراج با احمد مختار یکی بود علی بود. That held head up high king, that proud king who at the night of the Mi'raj was right there with Muhammad Mustafa, the chosen one, it was Ali. And then just to make sure that you don't feel too bad about saying these kind of things, don't think this is infidelity, I'm just telling you the truth. Right? So these poems are recited in a Shi'i Iranian context as part of the Shi'ification of Mawlana, and they're recited by some of the very popular singers, including someone like Hayrat, who is something like the Kulthum of the Iranian scene, in both stature and weight. And very much as in the Turkish context, politicians from left and right are trying to claim the legacy of Hazrat Mawlana. Here's the uber-conservative populist ex-president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who opens up and inaugurates a conference to honor the 800th anniversary of Mawlana's birth. And here's the most important intellectual dissident of the Iranian regime, Abdul Karim Surush, who has perhaps an unrivaled mastery of the poetry of Mawlana. He speaks of Mawlana as the Payambar Ishq, the messenger of radical love, and he uses the poetry of Mawlana to hammer away at the Iranian regime. So both the right and the left are trying to appropriate and claim the legacy of Mawlana. That leaves us a few minutes to talk about this third creature. Not Hazrat Mevlana and not Hazrat Mawlana, but this Euro-American creature known as Rumi. A Rumi who is not a Persian or a Turk, certainly not a Muslim, but someone who is born in California. A universal mystic whose universalism is not reached through Islam, but rather by circumventing and transcending Islam. Many of us know that about 20 years ago, he was proclaimed as the best-selling poet in America. On a weekly basis, I get inquiries from people saying, I found this Rumi quote on Facebook, can you tell me the original? No, I can't, because what you see from Rumi on Facebook bears no earthly relationship that what Hazrat Mevlana or Hazrat Mawlana ever said. It's people making up stuff and slapping the name Rumi on them. And this is not so new. Even the great Reynold Nicholson, right, who spent his life editing the Masnavi, gave his eyesight in the process of doing so, he includes poems in his collection, چه تدبیر مسلمانان که من خود را نمیدانم. What am I to do, Muslims? I don't even know who I am. I'm not Jewish, I'm not Christian, I'm not Muslim. And then Nicholson adds in a little footnote, by the way, this poem is not to be found in any of the old manuscripts. So I'd include it. Right? Because it portrays Rumi as this mystic who transcends any religious tradition. And of course, in the hand of Coleman Barks, it's not enough for him not to be Jewish or Christian or Muslim. He's not Hindu, he's not Buddhist, he's not Sufi. He doesn't belong to any religious or cultural system. Right? If you've attended some of the concerts by Coleman Barks, you know that there's a call and response. He begins a line, and thousands of people speak back these lines to him. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem. And yet, when you read the original, Emruz choharruz kharabim kharab, مگشا در اندیشه و برگیر رباب صد گونه نماز است و رکوع است و سجود آن را که جمال دوست باشد محراب. Today, like every day, we are ruined. Don't close the door to thought. Pick up a stringed instrument instead. There are 100 kinds of namaz, including bowing down in namaz, ruku', and prostrating yourself in namaz, sujud. It's not hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. It's specific references to the Islamic ritual prayer. So here's the important part of what we miss, is that it is not only that Coleman Barks is taking the Islam out of Rumi. It's not only that he, as he's openly talks about, minimizes the language of God, because it's offensive to some people. I think the corollary is what we haven't done enough thinking about. This is also part of ending up with an Islam that is de-Rumified. It is an Islam that is bereft of that entire realm of ihsan, of love, of mercy, of kindness, of tenderness. Charlatans and quacks, like Deepak Chopra, publish entire books called Love Poems of Rumi, which have nothing to do with anything that the historical Mawlana said. It's even worse for Hafiz, poor Hafiz. If you ever read anything by Hafiz on Facebook, Hafiz didn't say it. Daniel Ladinsky said it. And we see images which would shock the sensibilities of many more conventional Muslims, including that professor of Sharia known as Hazrat Mawlana. So what's the connection, and I'm going to end here, what's the connection with the role of the state? Well, living under the American empire, there is a deliberate state agenda to construct some entity called the moderate Muslim. The moderate Muslim is he or she that has not a mumbling word to say about atrocities of the American government or her ally. And when you read the reports from neoconservative think tanks like RAND, they are very specifically interested in appropriating Sufism in the construction of this politically quietist model of moderate Islam. That image of the whirling dervishes is from the RAND Corporation. So I think the last word that I want to leave us with is the reminder of the ongoing wisdom of Kenan Rifai. Almost a century ago, he made the very famous statement, Amma akademi olarak açıl ejekter. The door to the Sufi lodge may be closed, but the academy is open. The teaching of Sufism is to be conducted in the academy. Any and all of us who work in a university context know that the university is not an apolitical space. However, I would still propose that it is possible to conduct the investigation of Sufi studies in a university context in a way that remains aware, suspicious, critical and self-critical of the apparatus of state power better than other institutions in society can. And if we can do so, then it may be that we still have a part to play in the expansion, the deepening, and the sweetening of Sufi wisdom. Thank you for your time.
So, good afternoon, everyone. At first, I'd like to express my apology for my voice. I had this problem since yesterday morning. Anyway, I try to portray a kind of modern Sufi, focusing on the case in modern Syria. The political history of modern Syria can be considered to have begun with the collapse of Ottoman Empire before developing under the French mandate, which facilitated the introduction of Western system of education, a military regime that took power after a coup d'etat executed by secular officers, and then Arab socialist regime that unified the country with Egypt, and finally Ba'ath Party. Although during these transitions many new Muslim leaders arrived in Syria, but they were unable to establish their presence or improve their positions, especially after the Ba'ath Party, Ba'ath seizure of power in 1963 and the rise of the Hafiz al-Assad regime in 1971. An exception to this was Ahmad Kuftaru, the biggest image, who developed a collaborative relationship with the Ba'ath Party and gained a strong socio-political influence in modern Syria. Although from the time he was adolescent, Kuftaru served as sheikh as a Naqshbandi Sufi order. He is most well known for serving as Syria's Grand Mufti, the highest ranked religious post in the country from 1964 to 2004, when he passed away. Consequently, his fame as a religious leader has often been attributed to the fact that he was the Grand Mufti. However, this presentation aims to focus on his the lesser analyzed aspect of Kuftaru as Sufi sheikh. Ahmad Kuftaru, he was born into a Kurdish family in a small district named Rukn ad-Din in northeast Damascus, which is located at the foot of Qasim mountain. His grandfather Musa had originally moved to the city, to Damascus with Ahmad's father, Amin, in 1894. And shortly after settling, Musa began teachings at a small mosque named Abu Nur in the district. Later, after Musa passed away, who was still young at that time, when his father passed, studied under famous scholars in Damascus, one of whom was Isa al-Kurdi, a sheikh of Naqshbandi Sufi branch. Upon al-Kurdi's death, Amin inherited his tariqah and combined it with the educational responsibility he inherited from his father in Abu Nur, As a result, the mosque Abu Nur became a place where a variety of disciplines and schools were taught. This educational background caused Amin to develop the belief that the most important thing for Syria's welfare at that time was ensuring the solidarity of Syrian citizens under the French mandate, removing rivalries between disciples or disciplines or schools. This idea later became a core of Amin's educational philosophy, which we could call it anti-sectarianism or something like this. Amin's activity had a crucial impact on his son, Ahmad Kuftaru, who would in turn inherit his father's responsibilities in Abu Nur Mosque in 1932. Upon assuming his new roles, Kuftaru began to endeavor to develop the mosque into an educational hub, facilitating many activities, and also further to instill the idea of anti-sectarianism into the educational philosophy present in the disciplines and the schools provided at the mosque. Kuftaru transformed Abu Nur into a place where people could pursue traditional studies of Islam. As a result, he became regarded as a person, according to a disciple, who presented the new idea of accepting the truth of Sufism and exhibiting knowledge of sacred teachings, Sharia, and the will of youth. Inheriting the tariqah in 1932 in Abu Nur Mosque clearly represents the starting point of Kuftaru's career as a young religious leader. In spite of this, his role and activities as a Sufi shaykh have generally not been focused on to any serious degree in previous researches. There are two possible reasons for this. First, in parallel with his educational activities, he expanded his presence into Syria's official religious circle through being appointed as a religious teacher or mufti in Damascus. The second reason is that he intentionally avoided publicizing his Sufi background. He explains that Sufism is purifying the soul, tazkiyah nafs, a preparation imposed on every person in order for them to become veritable Muslims in regard to the aspect of behaviors. And he also likened the Sufism to ablution before prayers. So wudu qabla salat. Further, he stressed that Sufism is a part of Islam, not the whole. These quotes can be considered to portray his belief that Sufism was an internal matter or related to the cultivation of spirituality. On the other hand, we can also use his statements to determine his true feelings in this regard. His educational ideas and career, especially anti-sectarianism. These are said to have been influential in creating the background to his idea of Sufism. One of Kuftaru's most prominent disciple, Muhammad Habash, he explained the link between Kuftaru's career and his educational concept as this statement above. This explanation above is rhetorical, but it is clear that jargon can be interpreted as the things that constrict the cultivation of spirituality in every Muslim. In the following quote below, Kuftaru himself explains how jargon causes this kind of difficulty. Through this statement, we can determine that the Sufi education Kuftaru received as a result of his status as a sheikh had given him the understanding that Sufism had become an exclusive discipline. Might be possible, I mean. In other words, Kuftaru was afraid that there was a risk that Sufism would suffocate the spiritual aspect of Muslims. In his opinion, the presence of jargon carried the risk of dividing Muslims and mummifying the path of faith, thereby turning Sufism into a sect. Consequently, Kuftaru recommended the replacement of some jargon used in Sufism with words found in Quran and Sunnah. And he called this embedding of terms into Sufism, he called Quranic Sufism. So, what about tariqah, a corporate form of Sufism? When analyzing this, an interview book concerning tariqah in modern Syria provided a great deal of helpful materials. In this book, one of the sheikhs who inherited the tariqah after Kuftaru's death, Ahmad spoke on his behalf. In the following, we see his answer concerning whether one should belong to tariqah or not. This answer doesn't tell people to adhere to Sufism and use some jargon or observe rituals. Concurrently, he stresses the importance of a tariqah as a gathering in the presence of a master. Now we must consider the part that tariqah played in Kuftaru's Sufism. As previously said, Kuftaru inherited the post of Sheikh of Naqshbandi branch from his father in 1932, and then transformed the mosque into a hub of educational activity. In parallel with this, he also began to change the mosque into a more strategic body. I mean, the mosque became a place for social interaction, receiving some politicians who then supported the sending of youth, young Muslims who had studied in the mosque, into the suburbs of Damascus to serve as a religious teacher or preacher, I mean official religious post. Kuftaru attempted to transform Abu Nur Mosque into a place that could produce the leaders of Syria's next generation. Later, at the beginning of the 1950s, Kuftaru tried to further expand the function of the mosque by creating the charitable organization, Ansar Charity Association, before turning the mosque into the religious complex Abu an-Nur. Through these transitions, the mosque Abu Nur ceased specializing in tariqah. However, interest in tariqah recovered after the 1960s. In pioneering research on Kuftaru, the formative years of this tariqah were largely defined as the 60s or 70s. According to these researches, a Naqshbandi branch called Kuftariya was created during this period. However, as I said, Kuftaru inherited his tariqah in 1932. So what caused these researchers to give a different year? The primary reason, I think, for this is that his tariqah came to be evaluated as a tool used to support birth policy during the 70s. During this period, the tariqah was used to contribute to the development of extracurricular activities, such as operating sport clubs and swimming pools in Lebanon. Through this expansion of activities, Kuftaru's tariqah became quite noticeable in the society. Concurrently, this change in the tariqah was seen as a part of a strategy of the Syrian government to strengthen its influence in Lebanon in order to keep Israel from expanding its presence in the region. From this point of view, Kuftaru's tariqah, created in 1932 and later consolidated, was recovered as a result of political circumstance. In this sense, Kuftaru's idea and activities in regard to Sufism cannot be only by analyzing his educational philosophy, but also by considering the political situation around him. At this point, we should turn our attention to the political background he faced. After independence in 1946, Syria was ruled by the military government and finally by the Ba'ath government. These regimes largely formed organizations tasked with ensuring Islamic values did not gain a foothold in the public sphere. As for Kuftaru, in the 1940s, he was solidifying his position as an official religious figure by acquiring several official posts. However, he was also one of the founders of Sham Ulama Association, established in 1938, through which he operated several educational programs. And then in 1944, this association changed to Rabitatul Ulama League, supporting the election campaign of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, after the 1950s, in contrast to the political decline of the Brotherhood, Kuftaru, in favor of secular governments, he rose through the ranks, eventually being appointed the Grand Mufti in 1964. And although he had a relationship with representative of the Brotherhood, especially the member of early moderate generation, including Mustafa Sibai, but he gradually distanced himself from the younger generation of the Brotherhood, who were in favor of using force to achieve their objectives. This background meant that the mid-1960s also marked the occurrence of two important incidents that shaped modern Syria. First, of course, the Ba'ath Party seized power in 1963, transforming Syria into a de facto one-party state under its tyrannical rule. Second, as a result of Ba'ath Party's non-Islamic policies, an armed clash between the government and the Brotherhood occurred in Hama in 1964. These events caused Kuftaru to solidify his position as a pro-government ulama, which he achieved by discontinuing his relationship with the Brotherhood. And then 1997, Hafiz al-Assad became president of Syria. Hafiz al-Assad, he is often regarded as a secular dictator who consistently rejected Islam. However, in fact, he actually carefully manipulated followers of Islam using the carrot and stick approach. After gaining control of the country, for example, al-Assad attempted to build a collaborative relationship with Sunni elders and isolate the Muslim Brotherhood. And in 1970s, further, he frequently raised the salary for mosque preachers, as well as the budget for building mosques. He acquired support from Sunnis, representing the majority of Syrian citizens. Hafiz al-Assad's main plan was to form an official Islam through Sunni spokesperson, thereby eliminating anti-governmental Islamism. The actors in this official Islam needed to be pro-government, of course, moderate, non-political, and whom the people would regard as authoritative. as they would be tasked with the upholding of universal values of Islam, not those of a specific sect or school. In view of this, Ahmad Kuftaru, as a result of his position as Grand Mufti, his long and distinguished career as a ulama and his renown in Damascus through his charitable activities, was a favorite actor of official Islam. For President al-Assad, it was particularly favorable that Kuftaru had discontinued his relationship with the Brotherhood. For the actors of official Islam, it was important that their change from pro-Islamism to pro-Ba'ath could be plausibly explained. This was because if it was suggested that they were forced to be pro-Ba'ath, or that they had changed their leanings in order to please the government, they would be mere puppet scholars in the eye of the people, and they would lose their spiritual authority. In addition, as Sufism is regarded as a cultivation of spirituality for individuals, it has a capacity to represent one of the things requested to the official Islam, I mean the non-political faith that the official Islam requested. In other words, Sufism could be regarded as something within every individual, and not something related to society or the public sphere. On the other hand, so that Kuftaru embedded Sufism into Quran and Sunnah, so the common value of Islam was very favorable to official Islam, I mean favorable to Hafiz al-Assad. On the other hand, although tariqah was resorted and publicized after the 1980s, it once again lost its status as a method of providing education and trainings in Islam and Sufism, being replaced by the government of the Abu. I know, yes. The religious dialogue, okay. So, Ahmad Kuftaru, he always maintained that his form of Sufism was based on the idea of anti-sectarianism. However, it could also be evaluated as a response to the limited form of Sufism allowed under the Ba'ath regime, or as a form of Islam that was developed by President Hafiz al-Assad in order to ensure his popularity in the modern Syria. Therefore, Kuftaru could be regarded as a blatant puppet scholar and also concurrently as a pure or sincere Sufi educator by way of compensation for playing the role of an actor in official Islam. Thank you very much.
Is it working out? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Well, then everybody has to stand up. Stand up. Everybody has to stand up. Well, Bill Chittick doesn't need to stand up, but everybody in the audience has to stand up. So, while you're all standing up and you're saying, this is the best speech I've heard because we're standing up, I'm going to make this into an introduction to what I want to say. So I'm going to use four words in Arabic, and I'm going to say them very slowly, and then I'm going to ask you to repeat after me. So the first word is ilmi. Ilmi. Ilmi bihi. Ilmi bihi. Hayrat. Harati. Harati fihi. Ilmi bihi. Harati fihi. Sit down, please. So, when I was thinking about my talk, I realized that following Omid and Syria, under the Ba'ath and Sufism there, that you needed a slight light touch, and preceding Bill CHITTICK, who is going to take you into the depths of Sufism, I'm going to float in between. In fact, my talk is going to be about something called Barzakh logic. So if you just remember the phrase ilmi bihi, hayrat fihi, and Barzakh logic, you can forget my name and please forget that I am the 11th speaker and you have 33. So you're only 1/3 with there, even after I'm done. So I will try to be very gentle, instructive, and I will come back to ilmi bihi, hayrati fihi. So I took seriously the charge to rethink methodologies for the study and teaching of Sufism. And I decided to limit myself to one key term, adab. Sulami famously declared, tasawwuf kulhu adab. All tasawwuf is adab. And I just want you to consider, is that dictum true, or was it true in the 11th century, or now in the 21st century? And so I'm going to focus on key terms, and I want to argue that hayrat, that term that you've just learned in a new phrase, which by the way does not come from me, but Sheikh al-Akbar, as you'll learn soon. Hayrat seems to demand, in my view, equal attention to adab. And as an experience, it is prior to adab. And so I raised the query, can both adab and hayrat be foundation to madhab-e-ishq? And I'm really reminded of an image as I was listening earlier and people were saying, Sufism is like the police station. I was saying tasawwuf is like the police station, and you can hear it there, but you have to go inside the house and maybe the living room or the kitchen where you find ihsan, which is one term that's preferable, or another term which I'm going to discuss, madhab-e-ishq. So tasawwuf is just an outside wave or police station talk. The inside inner term is either ihsan, I would argue, or madhab-e-ishq. So in the Cambridge Companion to Sufism, which some of you may have heard of, and which I had to read to review, I was really struck that I found two essays with opposite approaches to Sufism. And they did so without any indication that they were opposing each other. One of them, from actually a Japanese scholar, Saiko Yazaki, said that adab is not just the key term, but it's the element, the core element of all Sufism, metaphysical, ethical, practical. And the very next essay by Ahmad Mustafa, also a distinguished scholar of tasawwuf or madhab-e-ishq, demonstrates how antinomian or be'adab Sufi mendicants, those who he calls malamatis, embody the elusive truth at the heart of tasawwuf or Sufism. So let me ask, is hayrat, which I would define as perplexity before the divine other, is hayrat perhaps an axial key term that not only defies but challenges adab? After all, it's mediated through poetry and zikr. Hayrat relates all devotional words, acts, and outcomes to one emotive psychological reflex, one that Sochar Moraka and Bill CHITTICK have underscored in their wonderful book, The Vision of Islam, as niyyah, or intent. And it's niyyah or intent that I want to focus on today briefly in my talk. And I want to do so with reference to another essay that talks about adab and revelation in Ibn Arabi, which goes back to 1993 from Dennis Grill, who says that adab itself is not a single term and one must carefully follow the stages or degrees of adab. And he looks closely at chapter 169 in Futuhat al-Makkiyah, and it comes to where Ibn Arabi describes the station of abandoning adab. So this is Ibn Arabi describing adab in all its stages, and he comes to the fourth stage, and this is now a paraphrase from Grill's long essay. Is there greater perplexity? Hayrat. Such is the ambiguous, mutashabi. He to whom God has not given knowledge must say, we believe in him, all comes from our Lord, but none recollects it but those who have the understanding heart, ulul albab, those who take notice of the kernel of understanding, lub al-aql, not of its husk. In other words, beyond the law and its reason, which is the husk of understanding, is another logic, the kernel of understanding. Each relies on the other. They're not so much opposites, I would argue, as intertwined partners, but the key to this divine mystery is enfolded in the exchange between two travelers. And people often miss this when they read the Holy Quran and they come to this part, but it's really an engagement of two travelers, one known as Khidr and the other Moses. And by the way, Bill CHITTICK and I did not arrange that I'm talking about Khidr and Moses, and he's talking about Moses. I think there was something else in the air that made that happen. But when Grill comes to this place in discussing Sheikh al-Akbar ibn Arabi's interpretation with an unstated but clear accent on Niyyah, he says that al-Khidr, when you come to the end of the story, and you all know the story, besides I only have 15 minutes left, I'm not going to go very far. I don't want to be sheeted with that number that says you're there. So I'm not going to tell the whole story, but you can go back to the Holy Quran, or maybe you don't need to, you already know the story. At the end, of course, when Khidr has been defied by Moses and done these terrible things, he then explains why he's done these terrible things. And the first one is he sank the boat and he says, I wanted to damage it. This is a blameworthy act. This is not me interpreting, this is Ibn Arabi. And then when he says about the murder of a young man, he wanted their Lord to replace him by better than him. He talks about a combined action. What the action compromised is both blameworthy and praiseworthy. He kills a young man, but he wants to replace him one better. So it's both blameworthy and praiseworthy. And then lastly, speaking of the wall, which is rebuilt for 2 orphans, it's an act which is itself praiseworthy, the decision attributed wholly to God in the words of Futuhat, your Lord wanted them to reach adulthood, which is something without blame, it is only with praise. In other words, blameworthy acts are as integral to itinerant Sufis as is the notion of Adab. Or to put the case more directly, law or the Sharia, like reason or aql, and the boundaries of social interpersonal conduct, Adab, are set under a higher standard, and when God is a source of inspiration, and the recipient is pure of heart, pure in intent, Niyyah triggers a variant, and I would argue superior level of understanding. To put this very simply, Niyyah, or intent, does not preclude adab, or behavior, but it does precede it, and it informs all actions, whether blameworthy or praiseworthy. And now I just want to say something about a person who's not been mentioned yet in our deliberations here, but I think is very important, a scholar named Shahab Ahmad, who wrote a book called What is Islam? The Importance of Being Islamic. And in this he focuses, again, on how do you define tasawwuf as something that is more engaged, and not the term which is under the lantern of a police station, but something that's more integral to each person. And he uses the term madhab-e-ishq. In talking about madhab-e-ishq, he says this is more than just a register of Sufi ecstasy. It's the embodiment of what exceptionalizes Islam, and this is very crucial but very difficult. It is both the convergence and contradiction in search of meaning. Both convergence and contradiction in search of meaning. He moves beyond contrasting mysticism and formalism, or Sufism and Orthodox Islam. Instead, he tries to demonstrate how Sufism, far from being just a part of Islam, as it's sometimes discussed, or eccentric or marginal to Muslim identity, is in fact foundational. And in his book, What is Islam?, he tries to show how madhab-e-ishq becomes a foundational way of talking about Sufism within and not beyond medieval or modern Islam. To put it differently, it is unshackled by orthodoxy, beholden to adab, but tethered to hayrat. And this is where we come back to the phrase that you memorized. Ilmi bihi, hayrati fihi. If you think about this for a minute, I've thought about this phrase a lot. It's so amazing because ilmi bihi, you swallow it. It's something internal. Ilmi bihi. You have to go into yourself to say ilm, ilmi bihi. Hayrati fihi. You almost shout it. You almost get back your bad voice when you say hayrati fihi. Almost. So this contrast, which is called onomatopoetic, the sounds of the words reflect the meaning. When we say ilmi bihi, we are into ourselves. Hayrati fihi. But what's so beautiful about Ibn Arabi is it's the second which produces the first. It's the hayrati fihi which produces ilmi bihi. So my knowledge of him is my perplexity in him. And then he elaborates this with reference to this notion that hayrat is an attempt to come to terms with the fact that God does not, as orthodoxizers, I don't like that word, it sounds like somebody is trying to make a chemical out of Islam. Orthodoxizers would have Muslims speak with one tongue, but rather, says Ahmad, he, meaning Allah Ta'ala, expresses and manifests himself in a prodigious variety of mutually opposing statements and forms, the contemplation of which produces perplexity. I think that phrase itself may have produced perplexity. So let me repeat it. Allah Ta'ala expresses and manifests himself in a prodigious variety of mutually opposing statements and forms, the contemplation of which produces perplexity. And so I want to end by saying a few more things, not about Shahab Ahmad, but about Jamal Nur Sodga Hoja, because I think she has advanced a very similar proposition in less theoretical but no less compelling language than either Ibn Arabi or Shahab Ahmad. The seeming contradiction between Adab and Hayrat is reduced, if not removed, when one considers her recent reflections. I had the privilege of seeing them in this forthcoming volume, Cultivating Virtue, which will come out from Fons Vitae in that state of Kentucky, in the southern part of America, in 2018. Yes, that was my deliberate false southern accent. But the book itself is not false, and it's very wonderful. Cultivating Virtue, the translation in English of some of the observations of Jamal Nur Hoja. And in one of them she says, my teacher, Samia Averdi, used to say, from all that is beautiful in this world, there are three things I love, paraphrasing the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Love, ashq, adab, and mystical knowledge, irfan. Three things, ishq, adab, irfan. Without adab, love and mystical knowledge are not complete. Mystical knowledge is the ability to say and live, la ilaha illallah, there's no God but God, to unite the whole universe. It is to penetrate the secret of things appear to the knower as names, and in all the names, the namer appears. In this evocative dictum from her teacher, we have the core elements of tasawwuf, or what I would call madhab ishq. Adab is the bridge between the other two, that is to say between ishq and irfan. But the indispensable initial element is the experience of ishq, eshq, ashq, three variants of the same word for passion, or I prefer to say passionate, radical love. And this is also the topic of another comment which comes up in this Cambridge History to Sufism from Ahmad Ghazali, to wit, that ishq, eshq, ashq must be conceived as a unitary reality manifesting itself in diverse levels and degrees. Again, I apologize, this is a very long phrase, but I'm quoting somebody, so I want to be accurate. Ishq, eshq, ashq is a unitary reality manifesting itself in diverse levels and degrees. And so let me conclude by saying that ishq must be a unitary reality, but it's also a unitary reality manifesting itself in diverse levels and degrees. That insight applies also to the capacity of each and one of us, every creature, human, animal, terrestrial, celestial, to mirror then perform ishq in her or his lifespan. Since it is the mystery of Hayrat which inspires ishq, mere mortals must hesitate on the cusp of silence, the edge of mystery where ishq leads to the adab of haqq performed through us, but also beyond our understanding. And I want to close with another note from Jamal Nur Hoja and this book, Cultivating Virtue. What I call the logic of barzakh is illustrated here. The logic of barzakh is that Hayrat and adab are like Jalal and Jamal, the majesty and the beauty, mirrored in each of us as at once divine and human, yet neither fully divine nor solely human. And so in madhab ishq, or madhab ashq, purity of heart tips the scale of our capacity, prompting each of us to seek the summit, which is also the limit, in our search for truth, for love, for the beauty of majesty and the majesty of beauty, twin peaks of each and every spiritual journey. Thank you. And thank you, Jamal Nur.
Should I?
Oh, here.
First, I want to. Are we on? I want to thank. Am I coming through here? All right. I want to thank Bruce for that beautiful presentation, the importance of love. And among other things, his talk has given me a bit of relief from the thought that I should have stuck more closely to the theme of the conference. But I can hardly add anything to what he has said. So I want to focus on what I consider to be the basic task of scholarship in the field of Sufi studies. That is, to prevent the tradition on its own terms through translation and interpretation. The fact is that the vast majority of important Sufi texts have never been translated into English or other European languages. It falls upon us who know the languages to make the literature available so that people do not have to depend on our judgments, that is, us scholars, since too often we simply speak for the current and always changing presuppositions of our academic fields. Today, then, I simply want to offer a taste of a project that I have just completed, a translation of one of the most important Sufi texts in Islamic literature. This is Roh al-Arwah by Ahmad Sam'ani, a person whom, unless you've read some of my stuff, you have never heard of. Sam'ani was a Shafi'i jurist, a faqih from Mav, who died in the year 1140, right? So 20 years, 30 years after Ghazali, even closer, 20 years after Ahmad Ghazali. The book is a 600-page Persian commentary on the names of God. Unlike its numerous predecessors in Arabic, it pays little attention to etymology and lexicology. Instead, it presents a panorama of theology, cosmology, spiritual psychology, and ethics, while drawing from a whole range of earlier teachers, not least the Sufi tradition as it had developed in Nishapur under the guidance of Qushayri. The text is remarkably beautiful and is interspersed with numerous anecdotes and a great deal of Persian and Arabic poetry. I consider it the most complete presentation of the religion of love in the 12th century. No doubt, Savoneh, the exquisite little book by Sam'ani's contemporary Ahmad Ghazali, deserves to be recognized as the first Persian classic on love, but Roh al-Arwah is far more comprehensive in its treatment of the topic, and at the same time, it uses a language that is no less beautiful than Ghazali's. Sam'ani often retells the Quranic stories about the prophets. In each retelling, he throws new light on the beginningless love affair between human beings and God. Today, I want to provide a few excerpts from his extensive remarks on the lessons that lovers need to learn from Moses, who would not be held up as an ideal lover in the Western tradition, but it's easy to see, especially with Sam'ani's help, why, in fact, in the Quran, he's central to the notion of love. Now, in all cases of human love for God and for other human beings, it is God's eternal love that leads the way. This is a standard reading. That is, many, many other authors say the same thing. A standard reading of the Quranic verse, يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَهُ. He loves them and they love him. Now let me read one of Sam'ani's explanations. O dervish, first, the station of Mount Sinai began seeking Moses. Then Moses began to seek. Otherwise, Moses was carefree. First, the station of two bows' length, both same, began yearning for Muhammad's feet. Then Buraq was sent to Muhammad. Otherwise, that paragon's work was all set. First, Joseph's beauty came looking for Jacob's love. Then Jacob bound the belt of love. Otherwise, Jacob had no awareness of that story. First, the beginningless request set out to seek us, then we began to seek. Otherwise, we knew nothing of love's secret. Now, in only one instance does Sam'ani use the expression the religion of love, though he uses it in the form madhab-e mahabbat. Mahabbat, ishq, dosti, he uses all three words synonymously. In this passage, he is explaining that the changing states and stations of the human soul are necessary consequences of the complementary divine attributes. Like Rumi, he typically designates these attributes with the pair qah and lutf and qah, severity and gentleness. Less commonly, he uses jamal and jalal. These attributes establish the relationship between the two lovers, man and God. They give rise to the ups and the downs of love, the joys and the sorrows of union and separation. Here's the passage. In the religion of love, both gentleness and severity come forth, both caressing and melting, both being pulled and being killed, both making do and burning. There must be caresses so that a man may know the harshness of being taken to task, and there must be taking to task so that he may recognize the value of caresses. Those who hope to find nothing but sweetness and happiness in love are thinking like merchants. They want to do a little something and reap a nice reward. According to Sam'ani, such people are at best beginners in love. God will treat them gently until they advance on the path. As Sam'ani puts it, benevolence is for beginners. As for the advanced, their possessions are free for their taking, and their blood may be shed. The road for them is severity upon severity, trial upon trial. Sam'ani often explains why moving forward in the path of love brings about increased harshness and severity from God. For example, he writes, as long as the aim and goal is bounty and bounteousness, bestowal and gifts, the door of response will be open and the sought object will be linked to compliance. God will answer your prayers. But when a man passes beyond this station with steps of seriousness, when he raises the banner of aspiration in the world of love, when he gives a place in his heart to yearning and longing for the station of witnessing and contemplation, and the way station of unveiling and uncovering, then he becomes a sick man whom no one visits, and a desirer who is not desired. Whatever he requests, whatever supplication he utters, whatever story he tells, whatever complaint he narrates, he is presented with, quote, the seeking is rejected, the road is blocked. Have you not heard the story of Moses? He was granted so many of his aims and desires, but when he talked about vision, it was said to him, thou shalt not see me. Yes, such is the severity of the beloveds. And upon this, the road is built. In short, again, another quote, benevolence is for beginners, but there is no benevolence for the great. It follows that if you want to advance in the religion of love, you must stand like a dog at this threshold for 1,000 years and become nothing but anticipation without desire and choice. And perhaps they'll open the door and throw you a bone. What answer is given to dogs? They stand at the door of the shop from morning to night, and then at night the door is shut and a stone is thrown in their face. But a dog will not go away because of a stone. O deprived one, from morning to night you sit before the shop with your eyes fixed on the door. Has a day ever come when they threw you a piece of meat? The dog says, no, but they have my beloved in their hands. So, Samani frequently discusses God's refusal to show himself to Moses. He asks, for example, why should God single out one person for this extraordinary privilege? At the mountain, Moses asked for vision. It was said, thou shalt not see me. O Moses, God is speaking. O Moses, there is no stipulation that you be provided for. 100,000 poor wretches, estranged from their homes and families, down on their knees, their hearts roasted, their eyes full of tears, offer up their spirits in yearning for my presence. There is no stipulation that I leave them in their pain and single out one individual for the goal. Another reason for not showing himself was that God wanted to keep Moses from being destroyed, for he had not yet accomplished his prophetic mission. Moses said, show me. And he was struck by the blade of the severity of thou shalt not see me. Then a piece of rock received this robe of honor when his Lord disclosed himself to the mountain. When the vanguards of majesty's blows and the spears of beauty's banners appeared from the world of self-disclosure, the mountain fell to the ground, and it was effaced in itself. And Moses fell down thunderstruck. When he came back to himself, he said, Lord God, where did the mountain go? The address came, it was effaced and fell into the concealment of non-existence. O Moses, if I had given you what you wanted, my beauty would not have been diminished, nor would my majesty have been harmed. But instead of the mountain, you would have been effaced by the world of sorrow. But I have work for you to do. Now, in the last analysis, according to Samani, the simple fact is that God does not show himself to anyone. Quote, love's road goes forth on severity, and every moment the lover's food is a draught of poison. Here we have Moses seeking vision, and he was met with rejection. The mountain, however, was provided with self-disclosure, not having sought or asked. It had no excellence over Moses, but beloveds love to burn their lovers' hearts by exalting themselves above them. Something I think we've all witnessed in human love. Now, in terms of Islamic theology, the severity of love's road expresses a notion that the divine essence will never be seen. For created things will always be held back by the veils of majesty. I quote again, Abul Hassan Kharavani said, he cut up the hearts of the sincerely truthful, and he melted their livers with waiting, but he gave himself to no one. It came into Moses' heart, it is I to whom he spoke. The command came, Moses, strike that stone with your staff. He looked, and he saw a desert within which were 100,000 Moseses, in the hand of each a staff, each of them saying, show me. Now, in short, lovers have no option other than to put up with the severity of the beloved. Quote, he makes all lovers pleased with assent. He makes them approve of talk, and he gives the reality to no one. There may be a way station beyond the way station of Moses, but he wanted to pass beyond speaking. It was said to him, "O Moses, go back to your station. Do you want to reach the station of contemplation from the station of speech?" No one reached the standing of Moses in burning on this road, of the real, and no one reached the standing of Jacob in burning on the road of creation. "O Moses, here are some words. O Jacob, here's a scent." Now, according to a well-known hadith, to which Samani sometimes refers, Muhammad suffered more trials than any other child of Adam. This is often interpreted to mean that trial and tribulation are marks of God's love for his beloveds. Samani has this notion in mind when he puts these words into God's mouth as consolation for those who are afflicted by love for him. God says, O keepers of this world, have feasts and festivals. O exalted ones, have tribulation and tumult. One group is like that, one group is like this. Yes, I give that to anyone, but I do not give this trial and tribulation to everyone. I gave the unfortunate Pharaoh 400 years of kingship and well-being and did not disturb him. But if for 1 hour he had wanted the pain, the burning, and the hunger of Moses, I would not have given it to him. Look at how far the blessings of this world go. That fellow has lifted his head high with a crown. Give him 1,000. Then look at how far the violence of my tribulation goes. That one has fallen down. Kick him in the head. This is God speaking, according to Samani. In short, entering into the religion of love is a sure way to call down suffering upon oneself. Samani quotes this saying by an anonymous Sufi. Recognition, that is ma'rifah irfan, is fire. Love is fire. And this talk, this business of love, is fire upon fire. Then he remarks, it never happens that a place catches fire without tumult and burning. No doubt the vision of God will come to those who reach paradise in the next world, but no one, least of all any lover, should imagine that he will achieve vision through his own efforts. What a marvelous business! He commanded the angels to turn their faces toward dust, and he said to the Adamites, that is the children of Adam, turn your face toward the stone, the camel. What is this? This is to show the worth and level of your deeds. He said to Moses, but look at the mountain. Look at the mountain, for the mountain is a stone, and you are a clod. A stone is worthy of a clod, and a clod is worthy of a stone. When he gives vision tomorrow, he will give it as a bestowal, not because of worthiness. No eye is worthy of seeing him. No ear is worthy of hearing his speech. No intellect is worthy of recognizing him. And no foot is worthy of his robe. So no one should be dismayed that the great Moses was not given vision, since this is good news for all of the poor and the destitute, meaning the rest of us. If God had fulfilled the hope of Moses, somebody writes, with all his discipline and struggle, then the hearts of the destitute would have been broken. They would have fancied that gazing on me, God says, quoting God, they would have fancied that gazing on me is the recompense for deeds. To Moses, with all his perfection and the merchandise of his deeds, I said, thou shalt not see me, so that the hearts of the destitute would not be broken. Despite all the disobedient acts, ugly deeds, and disgraceful doings of the disobedient servants, the Maker's gaze on the heart will curtain them. God summoned Moses and gave him the good news of hospitality. But when Moses appeared in the attribute of bold expansiveness, Adab, he was refused to look. Thus, when the disobedient man, that's the rest of us, when the disobedient man in abasement and brokenness puts his head on the doorstep of remorse and is singled out for the gaze of gentle gifts, he will be a freeloader on God's generosity. In short, to follow the religion of love, one must negate one's own existence and actualize one's essential poverty. As somebody puts it, how can it be correct for you to be existent and for him to be existent? For you to have being and for him to have being. God is the unneedy and you are the poor. Thus, God's answer to Moses can be understood as the necessary consequence of the lingering existence of otherness in created things. According to Samani, again, God said to Moses, "O Moses, is it that you have brought along your own eyes, that you say, 'Show me'? Now that you have come with eyes, we have made your eyes wellsprings of blood, and by virtue of the uncaused will that has always been, we will make you gaze on a rock. O Chevalier, O Jawan Mart." Chevalier is the way to translate. Jawan Mart, Fatah, that is Davish, why would he show you his always having been? Rather, he will show you to yourself in your own attribute of never having been. As long as a mote of you is left, he will cast upon you the veil of the mountain. In the final analysis, the story of Moses is the story of the constant interplay of God's gentleness and severity within every human lover. Wherever there is a heart, there is a Moses. And wherever there is a breast, there is a Mount Sinai. The Moses of the heart went to the station of speech on the Mount Sinai of the breast, sometimes on the pack horse of light, sometimes on the steed of shadows. God's gaze on the mountain destroyed it, but his gaze on the hearts of his lovers brings them to life. Quote, when he spoke to Moses, he spoke in the shade of his gentleness. If he had spoken to him in the attribute of tremendousness, he would have melted at the first step such that no name or mark of him would have remained. What a marvelous business. Mount Sinai received the self-disclosure and crumbled. Hearts received the self-disclosure. And at every moment there is more agitation, rejoicing, and freshness. Yes, when Mount Sinai became the locus of the gaze, it came back to itself and did not have the capacity to put up with it. When hearts become the locus of the gaze, they do not become so through themselves. They become so through his attribute. The hadith, the hearts are between two fingers of the All-Merciful. So, the story of Moses and the mountain is the story of every heart. Quote, you should not fancy that there is only one Mount Sinai and one Moses in the world. Your body is Mount Sinai, and your heart Moses. The food of your heart is surely I am God, Innani ana Allah. If he was not jealous for the hearts, by God, the heart would not be the heart. God is jealous, Hayrat, very important notion in Sufism. God is jealous for hearts because he created the heart to love him alone. The function of his severity is to eliminate all love for others, for the ghair. So, last quote. A body is wanted tamed by the commandments. A heart is wanted contemplating the command. A spirit is wanted drunk with the wine of holiness in the session of intimacy. A secret core, a sir, is wanted standing on the carpet of expansiveness and empty of all being. A radiance of the light of gentleness is wanted, shining from the Mount Sinai of unveiling, snatching you, like Moses, away from all others, and setting you down in the station of contemplation and the domicile of struggle. This light will remove the shoes. This is the Quranic story of Moses. This light will remove the shoes of gazing on the two worlds from your feet, snatch the staff of disobedience from your hand, and bring you to the holy valley. and the unqualified bush. It will make you drunk with spirit mingled and repose, inducing wine, and every moment it will call out to the hearing of your secret core, surely I am God. It is I who am I. If anyone says, I am, I will break his neck. Even if you are not jealous of your own thoughts, your own aspiration, your own resolution, I, in my Lordhood, am jealous. Thank you.
Well, I would say we have time for some questions, but if you ask a question, then the wrath of the divine beloved might smite you. But if you dare ask a question that does not have the word I in it, consider yourself warned and go ahead.
Now we're getting to real Sufism.
There you go.
Thanks.
Can we ask a question after this? This is the language of Sufism.
So let's.
There's no question. This is the language of
Yeah, well, how can we ask the question?
We can't ask it.
That's what she says. I think that's a sign that we can
I
perhaps.
think it's time we can finish.
Yeah, let's have, everyone have tea.
There's no question.
Tea is the second language of Sufism.
Oh, no. Don, we didn't say that.
Please go ahead.
Right.
Well, since nobody's asking the question, I get to ask more. And I really enjoyed this panel once again. And and then I have a question to Professor Safi. And then I liked among all the things that you said, I think the Rumification of Islam is just a wonderful phrase that you came up with. And I think we all agree here. And then, you talked about the Iranian context and the context of Turkish Republic and America. And then I was really like the fact that you brought up the American context and the fact that his identity being manipulated by this American artist shows that, if you think about the classical Arabic poetry, the fact that he's actually a really great poet. If your name is used and people take your poem and then manipulate the poem, right? So, but I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit of historical context in which the artists or maybe the scholars or writers of America or other parts of the Anglo-American world have started to manipulate Rumi in this kind of positive manner? Because in the previous panel we heard how Carl Ernst talked about how Sufism used to be very negative in kind of earlier phase in Europe, and then it seems now, as we know, Rumi is something like the star of Islamic civilization. So can you just tell us a little bit more the historical context in which Rumi became the star of Islam in North America?
Thank you. So if you have the same love and appreciation for the Sufi tradition that I know many of the friends here do, there's the wonderful kind of sayings that you sometimes get, such as the reported meeting between Ibn Rushd and Ibn Arabi, that there's something between the yes and the no, and that's where the heads are severed from the necks. So there's the yes and a no here as well. Going back to the Victorian times, when you're dealing with people like Nicholson, and even his far more poetic student, A.J. Arbery, if you read their translations of Rumi's poetry, they say, and I quote, "No concession has been made to readability." Right? They specifically state that these English translations are produced for English-speaking students of Persian literature. And at the same time, reading, and again, mind you, Nicholson, a great scholar, Arbery, a great scholar. Nicholson literally gives his eyesight in the translation of the Masnavi. He's working without a printed edition. He's collecting manuscripts and doing all that work. A lot of love, a lot of respect for him. Yet, when you read his commentary, the 2-volume commentary, which has some useful insights from Al-Gharavi and other sources, and a lot of material in there that says, well, you know, even though the Sufis say that they're taking their teachings from the Quran and the being of the Prophet, we really know that they got it from the Greeks or the Indians or the Persians. Anything other than what they say, they're getting it from, right? So there is that kind of reductionist element there. Because we are in the guild of academia, we cannot entirely avoid the scholars who've come before us. And I entirely appreciate the need to scrutinize and problematize what these Euro-American scholars have said. I also refuse, in my own limited time in life that I have the academic study of Sufism be something that is defined by what 18th and 19th century European dead men had to say. There are living, breathing communities whose lives have been shaped by these teachings of Mazhab-e-Ishq in Turkey, in Iran, in the Arab world, in South Asia, in Central Asia. And to come up with these versions of Rumi that bypass an existing 700-year love affair, and that's what it is. It's a love affair with the lovers of God. It's something that I have characterized elsewhere as spiritual colonialism. So part of my own small, and I said my again, so I'm going to be smitten now, but part of my own hope would be that in as much as we end up contextualizing and scrutinizing the works of scholars of the West, that it is always done hand in hand, in tandem, with what the Turks and the Persians and the Arabs and the South Asians and the Central Asians and the Western devotees and lovers of these people have continued to say over the last few centuries. Surely their voice matters just as much, if not more. If you want more historical contextualization, what I would recommend is that those of us who care about Islamic studies and Sufi studies, we also have to be paying attention to developments elsewhere in religious studies. So when you take a look at the whole construction of that portion of American and even more so European society, remember, America is still a deeply religious society. By any measure, faith in God, attending church, America is one of the most religious societies in the world, which comes as a shock to many people outside of America. But there's a whole phenomena of people who self-identify today as spiritual but not religious. People who want to have a spirituality defined outside the confine of historical traditional religion. And I would propose that many of these versions of Rumi, which are not based on any kind of translation as we would recognize, are appealing in a very commodified, marketized way to the spiritually but not religious groups of people. So I think there's another body of scholarship that one has to also engage. Hocam.
Sorry, I want to tell a story.
Buyurun.
Once upon a time, maybe you translate. Bir zamanlar Türk televizyonunda ceviz Kabuğu diye bir program var.
Once there was a TV program, in Turkish TVs, we had a program called The Shell of the Walnut.
Hazreti Mevlana aleyhine çok kötü bir konuşma yapıldı orada.
At that program, there was a talk against Hazrat Mevlana.
Ben ağladım
I cried,
ama ağlamak yeterli bir şey değildi.
but crying was not enough.
Çalıştım, program hatalı olduğu için birçok şeyhlerle çalıştım beraber, imza topladım.
I collected signatures. I talked to some sheikhs because I had to do something. I worked on it.
Ama çok komikti çünkü Mesnevi'nin 5. cildine baktığımda şöyle diyordu.
But it was funny when I looked at the 5th volume of the Mesnevi. It was saying,
Mevlana diyordu ki ey cevizin kabuğundaki adam.
Mevlana was saying, old man who is on at shell of the walnut.
Sen beni anlayamazsın.
You cannot understand me.
Sen cevizin içini hiç kırıp yemedin.
You have never broken the walnut and eaten the inside.
Sen sadece ceviz kabuklarının birbirine vurmasından doğan dedikodudan hoşlanıyorsun.
You are only fond of, you only like the gossip that is produced when the walnuts are stick together.
Galiba Hazret izin veriyor bir tür konuşmalara.
Maybe Hazrat Mevlana is letting people talk as such.
Ve sonra cevabını o veriyor.
And then he answers those
Amin.
himself.
Bir şiir var hocamın, çok kısa bir dörtlük. Onu Asuman okur diye düşünüyorum. Ve hepimize bir cevap bu yani. Kenan Rifai Hazretleri'ne ait.
There's a poem of Kenan Rifai. Osman will be reading. This will be answered.
The irreligious call us religious. The religious people puts us down. We neither belong to one or the other, yet we are with the one and the other.
All right. Well, I think on that note, let's give a round of applause for the panel and get ready to take a little 10-minute break. Please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was wonderful paper.